But just in case anybody's new, doesn't really have any experience with this, let me just give you a quick lesson on how to use the chat box. That's just me. You're going to see on your screen are ones. Actually, I am going to, because it's noise. Okay, so what you're going to see on the screen, I hope you can still hear me, are these icons on top. You want to click the one that looks like a cartoon bubble. It's right next to the phone, and you're going to get a box that looks like this. You want to type where it says type here, and it looks like most of you figured it out already. If you have not put in your name and where you're from, please do so now, so we know who you are. And once I'm pretty clear everybody's got that, we're going to move on. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to I like to shut off as much as possible. All right. So first question for the group, and I'll try to keep the questions really simple. How many of you have used vLookup? Well, actually, I'll ask two questions. So how many of you at least are familiar with vLookup? And if you have, just write yes. If you have not, put no. Because I am going to do an introduction first to vLookup. Okay. So you're almost going to get two for the price of one here, because I'm actually going to start with vLookup, probably spend about 15, 20 minutes on vLookup, and then talk to you about the alternative to vLookup, which is index and match, okay? So let's start with vLookup and what it is, okay? So vLookup is a relatively old function. It's actually considered to be one of the most commonly used ones, which actually surprised me. And it's based on the idea of being able to look up data that's in a table. So let me give you an example of what a lookup table might look like. And this is certainly an extremely small one. For training purposes, this table could presumably be all your work orders. It could be extensive price lists, all purchase orders, all invoices, all checks. But there's certain characteristics that the lookup table has to have. Because if it doesn't meet this criteria, it won't work. So the first is, whatever you're going to be looking up has to be in the left-hand column. By the way, I numbered the columns here. That's not a requirement for doing it, but it's going to make sense for our training, okay? But you can only look up the left-hand column. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be the left-hand column of your spreadsheet. It just has to be the left-hand column of whatever you're looking up. So what does that mean? And I could probably mess this up for a minute and show you, okay? So if I had my prices to the right, to the left of, let's say the price is 31. I'm just duplicating what we have on the other side. That would not work with vLookup. So you can only look up something that is to the left and then look up something that's to the right of it, okay? So that's just a limitation in vLookup. Another limitation in vLookup is and it only applies to the lookup, okay? Each item in the lookup must be unique. Because if it's not, it doesn't know what to look up. And actually, if they're not unique, which can happen, it's only going to select the first one it sees. So if there were two bottom brackets with two different prices, it's not going to know what to do. So typically, at least in your lookup, they have to be unique. Now, your prices don't have to be unique. We could have bottom brackets and clamps being the same price. They could be bought at the same stores. You can see a lot of these are not unique, but whatever you're looking up has to be unique. Okay, that's just the first criteria. You're going to need that in an index and match as well. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through the syntax of it first, and explain what everything is, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing you have in the lookup, and by the way, our lookup is going to be where it says NA, and I'll explain to you later that if you're not looking anything up yet, it's going to generate the result NA, okay? Which just means it doesn't know what to look up, okay? And I can show you later how to get rid of that, okay? But the first thing it has to look at in the formula is where am I looking? Okay, in other words, where am I going to determine what I want to look up? And in this case here, I'm looking up the clamp, okay? So I have to tell it where to look. Second thing I have to tell it is what table to base the lookup on. And here, this would be the table, okay? Now, you don't want your descriptors in the lookup. That's going to throw you off, just your data. So the range I would be selected would be this range, okay? That would be my lookup table. Then the next thing is what column index number. In other words, as I look it up, what do I want to return? And that's why I put these numbers up here, 1, 2, and 3. So do I want to return the result in column 1, which, by the way, would give you the same thing as clamp? Do I want to return the result in column 2? Do I want to return the result in column 3? So it's basing it on, the number of the columns in whatever you selected as the range. Okay? So here, I'm looking up column 2. And actually, I want to add something to this. I want false here. And I'll explain to you. It's not going to change the result, but I'll explain why later. Okay, so I want to look that up. And so, again, it's the lookup value. It's the table itself. Which column do you want to return? And then, is it true or false? And I just want to explain what true or false is. This screws a lot of people up, too. Okay, so true is the default. That's what you're going to get if you put nothing in. True means it'll take an estimated value. So if I had typed CLA and there's nothing else, that's close to that, it would pick up clamp. In most cases in a lookup table, you don't want true. You want false. Okay? And there are some cases where you would use true. That I'm not sure I'm going to get into with you today. I might, okay? But in most cases, you want to select false. So, again, if you just look at the formula here, it's lookup table, table array, and then which column do you want to look up? Let me actually show you this one. So, because that one was a copy, I messed it up. So, it's lookup here. The table is what's in red, the column is the price, and false, meaning that has to be an exact match. Okay? And you could have lookup that's doing both. This column is returning the 5, that's returning column 3, which is the vendor. Okay? And once again, if we fill them all in, it's just going to generate the results, okay? So there's one thing that some people don't... First of all, let me stop. Any questions so far? I understand, like with anything else with this, unless you do it as often as I do, you're probably not going to remember the syntax. You're going to look it up. But if you don't have any idea what these things mean, you're not going to know what to do with it. So I don't expect you to commit to memory the format. Okay, so is everybody good? Just give me a good or go over it again, and I will. Okay? So you got to give me feedback one way or the other so I know. Okay, or okay is fine too. Okay. All right, so I just want to show you, and it's a minor thing, but, aesthetics matter. Notice that when I have when I haven't selected anything, I'm getting I'm getting an error message, a non-applicable error message, and that's kind of ugly, okay? So there is a way that you can get rid of it, okay? And the way to get rid of it is to wrap your lookup in an if NA. So the syntax for I don't want to make you too crazy, but the syntax for an if NA is, and the way you do it is you do the vLookup first, and then you add your if NA. So it says if there's an NA message and it's returning an amount, like a true, just put the amount. If it's not, give me something else. Give me a blank. And the way you show a blank in Excel is two quotes with nothing around it, okay? Nothing inside it. And so that generates a blank. So it's still an NA, but it's just that you're not seeing it. And so if there's an amount, it shows up as the amount. If it's a blank, it shows up blank. It's a lot prettier, okay? So generally I do that. You can also use if error, which will pretty much take it out if there's any kind of an error. It's probably better to use if NA, because if there's another kind of error, it'll take that as well. And this is the error you're expecting, okay? So that's a way to just get rid of it. And just to show you, you could have, because I did it down below, instead of having it, have a blank, I could have just put not found. And now it's just going to show not found if there's no item, okay? So I generally prefer to leave it blank, which again is just two quotes with nothing in between them, and that'll generate a blank. Okay, so all right, so let's take a look at some uses of a vLookup, okay? And, they're not terribly deep, but I want to at least give you a little familiarity with a couple of different other examples. Okay, so here, and ones that are a little more applicable to schools and government. Okay, so here's an example. I think the last time I did this, it was for a town, so I used town positions rather than, school district positions. But we have various union contracts and various provisions in the contract in terms of contributions, depending on whether you're a full-time or part-time employee. Okay? So here's my basic lookup table. Here's the percent of employee contribution to medical and dental, and that's a table. And what's good about it being in a table is if we have a renegotiation of the contract, all we have to do is change the table, and then it gets reflected in the lookups, okay? So it's good to not have it embedded. It's good to work off a data table, okay? So over here, we have our employees, okay? And what I'm going to show you is how it populates, okay? So, by the way, I added drop-down menus only because it makes for less errors. You don't have to have it. You could be entering it manual, full-time admin, but just makes it simpler, okay? So look what happens here. If I select a different bargaining unit, it's going to pick up a different contributions. Now, by the way, this number is a calculated number. So that's basically taking the base salary and multiplying it by the contribution. So that's calculated, but it's calculated based on the lookup, okay? And here again, depending on what bargaining unit they're in, you're going to get a different result. And the reason why, when in the absence of anything, you're seeing blanks, it's because in this case, I used an if error. Actually, it's better to do if NA. I should stick to my own. They both work, but I have an if NA, okay? So that might be certainly a really good use if you're working in a business office or a human resources department, okay? So again, here's just another one, all right? And I'll show you what I did as a little quality control check to make sure that there are no errors, okay? So here these are my bank accounts. And what I want to be able to do is look up the bank account based on the name of the bank, Okay? So here I did not use a drop-down. But if I select Chase General, I'm going to get the account. But what I did to make sure that I didn't make any errors is I had it return the name of the bank over here. Because bear in mind, in the lookup table here, you need, by the way, you need at least 2 columns in a lookup table. You need, and this is my first column, which is the bank names, the other's the account numbers. Okay? So what I did here was in this lookup, I'm looking up column 2. In the second one, I'm looking up column 1, which is the same column as the lookup column. But what that does is it gives me a quality control check, because if I'm writing something here and it's not showing up here, it means it picked up the wrong item. Okay? The reason this can be unique is because each bank account has a unique name. So even though there's 2 Chase accounts, each one has a different name. Okay? We good? Good so far? Okay, so this is a quiz question for you. See if you get it. Okay? So if you had a list of all of your purchase orders, like you pulled off a run, and, poured it into Excel, could you create a lookup table that based on the purchase order would tell you the name of the vendor? If you think the answer is yes, just type in yes. If you think no, type in no. Okay, and so I'll repeat it again. Okay, so you have a list of your all of your purchase orders, and the columns are purchase order, name of vendor, amount, etc. Could you look up, assuming it's organized the right way, left to right, could you create a lookup table that would give you the vendor based on the invoice number? And I have an answer, some answers. Okay. So far, everybody says yes, which is good because you're right. You can do it. So now here's another question. Could you, if you had the name of a vendor, look up the purchase order number? Yes or no? Okay, Julie, you got it right. The answer is, well, Heidi, you got it right also. Okay, the answer would generally be no. Because you could have one vendor with multiple purchase orders. See, so it has to be unique. It has to be, each purchase order only has one vendor, but a vendor could have multiple purchase orders. So it's just something to understand about where you can use a vLookup and where you can't. I did a vLookup with a school, and we had some teachers with the same names, which can happen, especially if it's a large district. So we had to figure out a way to solve that. We ended up putting in the name of the teacher in social studies or grade 1, but each one of the lookups has to be a unique descriptor. If it isn't, it won't work. Okay? So what I want to show you next is and hopefully I fixed it. Actually, I didn't, but I will fix it now. Okay, it's an error here. Okay, should be column 5. All right. Okay. So what I have here is, and this is obviously a very, very small table, but what I have here is like a little lookup table that will look up purchase orders and return the vendor and the amount of the purchase order. Okay, and here again, I did not do a drop down, but I'm just going to pick one you can see on the screen. So I'll do 102766. And as you're going to see, it returns General Motors and 250. My mistake is I had selected the column for the budget code, but which maybe I wanted, but I don't in this case. Okay, so it meets all the criteria because it's Each one is unique. The column I'm looking up is on the left. The lookup area is here, and it's returning the results here. Okay? So that works. Okay. So here's an interesting one. It's a way you can kind of trick it a little bit. So this is a two-way phone number lookup. Okay? And so what I have is I have the employees' names. It's actually here. If I select an employee, it will return their phone number. So the question is, could you have a phone number and get the name of the employee? The answer is yes. So how do I trick it? Okay, the way I trick it is because my lookup always has to be in the left-hand column, I simply I just duplicate the employee names. So the table for the first one is this table, B and C column, and for the second one, it's C and D, and that would be how that works, okay? I think these are DC numbers. Now, I have to be careful here. I've got to do it in exactly the way the syntax was. And that's going to return the person's name. So there are times when you can do a two-way lookup, but you may have to shift your columns. By the way, when we get to match and index, you're going to discover you don't have to do any of that. Okay? All right. Let's keep going. Okay. So okay, let me go back and see what you mean. Are you talking about here? Or do you mean here? Okay, yes. The formulas are wherever you're going to be putting the result. This is the lookup table, this is the lookup value, and this is the result. And you'll see actually it shows it to you in colors. Unfortunately, the lookup gets blocked here, but the lookup would be blue, and the table is the red. Okay? So yeah. Okay? All right. All right, so before I do index and match, I'm actually going to just show you one more thing. Even though I have it on the I have it on the tab for the match. Let me see where I've got it. Hold on. 1 second. I'll look at my own spreadsheets and see where I put this stuff. Yes, it's one more thing I want to do with vLookup. So how many of you are familiar with nested if statements? Anybody familiar with like a nested if statement? Just put yes or no. All right. All right. So I'm just going to show you the problem, even though a lot of you may not be familiar with it. Okay? So here we have different sales tax rates depending on what state you're in. And I believe they're accurate. Okay? So Delaware has no sales tax. West Virginia is 6%. DC is 5.0575. Could be off. I don't remember how long ago I did this. Okay? So there's a couple different ways you could do this. One of the ways you could do it is to do an if statement. So I would actually need an if statement for every one of the states. And it basically looks something like this. Okay? If T11 is Delaware, give me a 0. Otherwise, do it again. Is it West Virginia? And it's nested if statements. And by the way, if you ever want to know, if you have a really complicated nested if statements and you want to know how many nests there are, count the closed parentheses at the end. So to do this one, we needed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nested if statements. Could you do it? Sure. Is it potentially a pain? Yes. Okay, so I want to show you how you could replace that with a vLookup. That's the replacement with a vLookup, using the sales tax rates as a replacement for the if statements. Just using the table as a replacement. So almost every time I come in to a district, I just was on Long Island a couple of weeks ago working with an SBO, and she just said, come in, I got a lot of these spreadsheets go back before my time. Take a look at them and see if there's any of them that you could fix. And I found a whole bunch of them they worked, but with these really crazy, elaborate and if statements. And from experience, I've learned almost every time you have a nested if statement, you can replace it with a lookup table. So, and it's got a lot of additional benefits. For example, here, while you could have linked them, if you have changes in the rates, you got to go back and fix all of this. If it's a change in using a lookup table, it's a piece of cake, okay? So as a general rule, I recommend staying away from, if statements, and try to replace them with lookups. Okay. All right. So now let's go and take a look at index and match and how it's different, okay? So first, we have this interesting little column here, and I'm only going to do, so that I'm kind of sticking to the same thing as a basic vLookup to start. I'm going to start by just looking up what the prices are for the grandes, okay? Later on, I'll show you how you could include it for all the prices, but I want to start with the grande and compare what you would do with one versus the other. Okay, so could you do a lookup table for this? Absolutely. In fact, I have one right here. It's vLookup, look up what the coffee it is you want, the particular coffee, look it up, then look in column 3. Do I have 2 there? It actually should be column 3. Or is it event day we're looking up? Hold on. No, it's 1, 2, 3. It's column 3. Right. And that's going to return my result. Okay, so you can use a vLookup to do this. Let me tell you how index and match works. Okay, so in index and match, it's 2 different functions. You first have your index. Now, in this particular case, the index is just 1 column, but it does not have to be 1 column. Okay, so let me give you the basic syntax for an index. Let me see if I can even find it here. I'm sure I have it somewhere. My apologies. I should have been a little better organized on this, even though I did it a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so let's talk about the index function first. I had the index function once described to me as like a map or a GPS, okay? So in your basic index, you're going to select your map. Now, it's important that the map not be what you're looking up, well, or the lookup, that it be the items you want to return, okay? So your map could be this if you're only looking in 1 column. Your map could be that if you're looking in multiple columns, okay? So you first have to identify your index, okay? And the syntax for the index, let's see if I have it somewhere here. The syntax for the index is give me the index and tell me what row to look up and what column to look up, okay? So if I, for example, was going to do just the index here, and I already did it already, but I'll do it again, okay? What I would do down here is I would do equals index, and I'll make it bigger so you can see it. And I'm just going to select just the grande prices. And now I'm going to say, what row do I want? So cafe mochas are row 1, cafe lattes are 2, cappuccinos are 3. So I'm just going to pick 3, okay? Now, I actually don't have to put anything else in here because the default, if it's only one column, will be that column, okay? And since I only selected one column, I could just put in a 1, okay? Or a 0, interestingly enough, and that's going to return me the result, the $4, okay? So I'm actually telling it in the index which row to look up. Okay, everybody with me so far? I don't want to make you too crazy, okay? So then I have my second function, and that function is the match function. And what the match function does is it's a lookup, okay? And so I'll just show you the match function. I'll put it over here, okay? So in the match function, it's the lookup value, which is going to be here, and then it's the array. Now, your match arrays must be there's an error there. Hold on. My lookup value, comma, my array. So in the match function, my array either has to be a row or a column. Okay? And that's going to return 3. So it's when you put them together that it makes sense. So, for example, here I have the index. Notice this generates a 3 because 3 would be cappuccino. So all I would have to do is where this is, substitute match the lookup value and then a comma. And that returns me the result of $4. Okay? So again, you can see it. So I have my index. My index says, where do you want to look up? And then my match is like a vLookup. Okay? So if I haven't exposed your head yet, it's actually much easier than it looks. It's actually simple. Okay? So you have an index that tells you what to look up, and then you have a match that has to match and tell you which row. Okay? Everybody okay so far? Sorta? Now, what's the advantage? Okay. Yeah, okay is what I expected, kind of. Okay. So, let me show you one of the advantages. If I can find it. Here we go. Okay, so here I have the exact same formula, same situation. This would definitely not work for vLookup. Okay? Because the information is in the same spot. It works fine with index and match. The only requirement is that whatever the size of the index has to be the same size as the match. Now here, I intentionally screwed it up, okay, on the bottom. And I'll show you how I screwed it up, and you'll see it in a minute, okay? So first, let me just show it to you again so you can see it. So for my index, it's here. And then where it asks for the result for the column, for the rows, I use match. And I didn't give you the last syntax and index. That's, again, whether you want it true or false, exact or not. 0 is exact, okay? And that's going to give me my result, okay? And if I drop down, so I don't even have to have the items together to have an index and match work. Would I really see this? Probably not. But what I might see are my prices over here, or my prices 6 columns over. They do not have to be in parallel. They don't have to be next to each other. So if you have, let's say, you're porting data off a finance manager or WinCap, and you don't have to do a lot of table rearranging to use index and match. You only have to make sure that they correspond, okay? But they could be, they could be 8 columns apart from each other, and one could be on the left and one could be on the right. So it's a lot more flexible, okay? So let me show you the error I made here on purpose. So you can see it. What did I do here, okay? So here I have all my different types of coffees, but I made a mistake on the index. My index is too small. So it's short one item, okay? So they don't match. So watch what happens. I'm fine until I hit the one item that doesn't match, and then I'm going to get this error, okay? So that's the only thing you have to watch out for when you're doing index and match, okay? Is that, your sizes are the same. Does everybody understand that? I can't have 8 types of coffee and have it because there's nothing to look against, okay? And it's fairly easy, by the way, if you double-click to see where the error is. Okay? All right. Okay, so far, I think we're doing good, and you can see one of the advantages. Okay, so now we get to the complicated monster here that I think is really useful, okay? And I know it took a little bit of time to get you there, but this stuff is a little complicated, okay? So what we have here is a salary schedule. Okay, and what I want to be able to do is to be able to look up the employee's pay rate based on 2 criteria. So the first thing is vLookup can only handle 1 criteria, okay? So you got a bit of a problem here unless you trick it a little bit, okay? So there is a way to get around it, but it's a little tricky, okay? So I'll show you how you get around it, okay? So first of all, let's just look at what we have here. So these are the names of the employees. This is the step, and this is the education level. And based on what we select, it's going to return the appropriate salary for that level, okay? So it's very useful. In fact, I work with a business manager on Long Island. We did this so that she could literally, and I know some of this stuff can be done through your system sometimes, but we were literally able to calculate based on, whatever we were doing, a what if on the salary increase, and immediately determine the budgetary impact because we knew the salaries and the steps in education for every employee, okay? So it's pretty cool, okay? So how do we get around the problem that vLookup is, the problem of vLookup being one-dimensional? And the way you can get away with that is by putting a lookup inside a lookup. And you can use vLookup and match. So what happens is it says, okay, look up the row. And then when you get to which column to pick, use match to determine the column. Because match will work either horizontally or vertically, and no, it's not case sensitive. Okay? As you saw here, it's not case sensitive. Right. So that's one way to do it. Okay? And So because what I'm doing here is I'm doing the lookup, and when it asks for what column, I'm then having a match substitute the column. So instead of saying column 3, I'm saying do this match based on this, and then that'll tell me what column, which then, supplies the need for the lookup. Does it work? Yes. But I think logically, it may not be so easy if you weren't the one that put it together to understand it. If you do it with index and match, it makes a heck of a lot more sense, okay? And that's why I recommend doing index and match, okay? And so I'm going to take you through that. We have enough time, and kind of explain how it would work with index and match, okay? So the first thing you should know is, in the example that I gave you before, the index was only one column. But your index doesn't have to be limited to one column. Think of it like a map, okay? So I could have a map that's a bigger map. Now, you definitely do not want any of the descriptors. You only want your data set in your index. So, for example, here I'm just going to show you how that works. So I'm going to do equals index. And I'm now going to select the whole salary schedule. And then it says, okay, give me the row and give me the column. And then I'm going to do exact, okay? So for the row, I'm going to pick row 2. And for the column, I'm going to pick column 3. And I'm going to put a 0. Wait, did I make an error there? I think I just need that. All right, so I can't figure out where I'm making an error here. Let me see. Let me look at the syntax one more time. Array, row number, column number. Okay, so the array should be this. The row number, I have to put a comma. The row number, 2. The column number, closed. Good. Okay, there it goes. I don't know why it didn't work before, but it worked now. Okay, so what did it do? It said, yeah, it doesn't ask for it, but it's an option. I believe it defaults to, you know what? It's not in this. Hold on a second. It's not in this that you need the match. It's in the match function. It's just a row and column, okay? All right? So that's kind of like, you think of it like a GPS map. I'm giving it the row and the column, okay? So now what I do is I substitute for the numbers 2 matches. One match for the row, one match for the column, and then that's how I can have my 3-dimensional lookup, okay? So I'm not going to redo it here. I'm just going to show it to you. But let's take a look, for example, at the salary here, okay? So what I have is the index, which is, the table, and then the first match is for the rows, whether it's 1 through 17, and then the second match is for the columns. So that for a 2-dimensional lookup, you have index, and then you have a match substituting each one of the 2 parameters, the rows and the columns, okay? And then it'll generate your result. So tell me if I made your head explode in that, okay? Okay, so it is actually, so the reason why it makes more logical sense is you're not trying to nest 2 things into one another. if you think of it as a simple map, it's funny. If you think about it, spreadsheets are really about rows and columns, and we have addresses, right? So, of course, the addresses are letters and numbers. So here, your addresses are really your first comma is your row, that's your address, and the other one is your column, that's the address, okay? So it makes a heck of a lot easier time when you want to debug if you do it this way, okay? So I'm not sure I have anything else to show you on that other than to just show you the formulas here so you can see it, okay? So once again, what do I have here? So my index is strictly my data set. No descriptors. My first match is for my rows, separated by a column. My second match is for my columns. What I would recommend if you're, kind of trying to debug it for the first time, probably do them as separate formulas. So get the index just there and make sure it works. You know what I mean? In that you can go and change around, make this a 1 and make that a 1, and see if you're getting the result you would expect on your table, which you do. Then do your two matches. Make sure they work, right? So the match here would be, let's say if you're doing the row match, okay, I got to tell it where to look. So I'm just going to put a 1 here. And I'm going to select where I want to look, what my array is, and here you would want the exact match, and that's generating a 1. And it's working, and then you would do the same thing with the other one. Here, they're going to be the same. 1 is going to be 1. When you're doing the other one, it's not going to be the same. It's going to give you, column numbers, okay? So for the second one, I'm going to do BA15. I do the match, where to look up. Remember, it's always just one row or column. I made an error here. Yeah. And that generates my 2, and those are the 2 things I need in my index. Okay? And then you put them together. All right. Questions? Everybody good? So I gave you this. Okay. Where would you be using a inexact match? It's actually interesting. I have one that's like that. I could send it to you, but I'll describe it to you in a minute. We had a one with longevities where, you get a longevity at 5 years of a certain amount. Then when you hit 10 years, you get another amount. So there you wouldn't want an exact, because if you used an exact with longevities, what you'd end up with is, if you were in year 6, it wouldn't produce a result unless you created a longevity table that went 0, 0, 0, 0. So if you used an estimate, it will always go to the one below it. So if you were at, let's say, 0, you were at 3, it would bring you to the 0 amount. If you were at 5, it would be whatever you were going to get at 5 years. If you were at 6, it would take you to 6. 5, whatever you were in year 5. So for something like that, you don't want an exact match. You actually want an approximate, okay? I mean, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but those would be examples where maybe something ticks off once you hit a certain rate, because it always goes back to the lower one. I'll send you one on it. I do have an example that I've done already. Okay? Okay? All right, so what do you say we call it a day?